public inquiry session formally, and the inquiry is to consider objections to the order made by Dumfries and Galloway Council under the Flood Risk Management Scotland Act 2009 for the flood protection scheme at Whitesands, Dumfries. Firstly, can I check that everyone can hear me? Yep. Okay. There are some potentially new parties here today. If I'm doing a bit of repetition for the people who've already been here yesterday, please bear with me. I'm just going to run through the programme, if you don't mind. Okay, my name is Lorna McCallum. I'm a reporter with the Scottish Government Planning and Environmental Appeals Division. My colleague, Mr Dan Jackman, is an Assistant Chief Reporter, and we've been appointed by the Scottish Ministers to hold an inquiry to examine the objections to the Whitesands Flood Protection Order and to write a report to the Ministers. As Mr Jackman said yesterday, it's for the Ministers to decide whether or not to confirm the order. And the purpose of today and the inquiry process is not for parties to persuade us of their point of view. It's just to make sure that we understand their respective positions and where these differ, the reasons why that is the case, so that we can set all this out in a report to the Minister. So we're all here basically to help the Minister make his decision. I would just clarify once more that all of the initial objections and further written submissions that have been received, either to the Council or directly to us, have been considered by us and will be taken into consideration when we write our report to the Ministers. In terms of housekeeping, could I just ask that everyone checks that their mobile phones are switched off or on silent, please? We're not expecting any more fire drills today, so if we do have an alarm, then the fire escape is there and we would congregate in the car park. Proceedings have been webcast and will be available to view via our website. The process does rely on vigilant use of the microphones. Mr Jackman explained yesterday how these are used. Basically just press it once to speak. But if people could speak quite clearly into the microphones, because the feedback we got from yesterday is that on occasion people aren't picking up the voices. And if people can be vigilant about turning the microphones off when they're finished, please. Even though the inquiry is being webcast, we will be making some notes, so again, please be patient if we ask you to slow down or stop while we make some notes. There's a public copy of the deposit documents at the back of the room. Please feel free to use them if you need to do so, but don't remove them from the room, please. Toilets are outside the door and on your left-hand side. From this point onwards, the inquiry will start. Every session will start at 9:30 in the morning with mid-morning and mid-afternoon breaks. Break for lunch will be slightly dependent on where we are with a witness and cross-examination or what part of the proceedings we're at, but we will aim very roughly to break around about between 12:30 and 1:30. We hope to sit in the evenings to 5 p.m. or thereabouts, if possible. It's likely that we may have a slightly earlier finish today, simply because Mr Dowson doesn't expect his witnesses to fill the full day. So what we would ask from this point onwards, if witnesses can be flexible and be prepared to be called slightly earlier to allow for some gaps in the proceedings so that we don't have too much to do in the coming weeks. We will, of course, where we said that individual people have got allocated slots, we will keep to that as far as we possibly can. There are some people who have requested specific spots that we can't alter. Okay, so if I could move now on to the inquiry proceedings. We held a pre-inquiry meeting on the 1st of August, and at that meeting the procedural arrangements were agreed. I think many of the people here today were at that meeting. So as agreed, the Town and Country Planning Appeals Scotland regulations inquiry session rules will be applied in the day-to-day running of the inquiry. The topics to be addressed were also agreed at pre-inquiry meeting, and they're set out in the inquiry programme. Today we're covering background and context. Tomorrow we move on to technical matters, and it's estimated that that's likely to take us right through to Wednesday of next week. Next Thursday we're due to move on to visual and heritage impacts. The following week will be impact on the town centre, tourism and parking and community engagement. And following a week's break, we reconvene in week 4. Week 4 is a bit more of a mix, where we have some witnesses from other subjects like technical matters, etc., who've still got to be heard, and there will be site visits arranged for the final week. We will conclude with a hearing on Friday the 7th of December on other matters and planning conditions should the order be confirmed. Does anyone at this point have any particular issues with the programme?
No, ma'am. We'll do what we can with the witnesses, particularly in the technical sessions, to try to achieve a continuous programme. It may not always be possible for people who are not local to be there at every single juncture, but we'll certainly work on that.
Thank you, Mr. Connell. No one else? As with any lengthy inquiry, there will inevitably be a bit of flexibility required, as I've discussed. So what we will do is we'll probably start each day with a short review of the programme or other appropriate points, and we'll have a regular update. If the timings are likely to be altered significantly, which we hope not, we will give people advance warning. I will turn later to ask parties if they have any comments to make in relation to the recognitions that have been circulated. And I'll turn now to explain the procedures a little bit for the people who haven't had the benefit of being familiar with this sort of thing. For this morning's session, each of the witnesses will read out their recognitions and will be led by either Mr Dowson for Whitesands and Mr Connell for the Council. In later inquiry sessions, some of the witnesses' recognitions exceed 2,000 words, so in those cases they will read out a summary recognition and their full recognition will be taken as read. Witnesses are then subject to cross-examination from the opposing side, and we may also ask questions of the witnesses, following which there would be an opportunity for re-examination. I would just emphasise any evidence in chief should be limited to picking up necessary points relating to matters that have arisen since the recognitions were lodged. You can presume that we're broadly familiar with the documents that have been lodged. We do have copies of the documents in front of us if need be. We're trying to work electronically as far as possible. So inquiry time is of course limited and therefore precious, so if there is any significant duplication of evidence by different parties or repetition of evidence already submitted in writing, then we would intervene. We'll similarly intervene if evidence strays significantly into areas that are not relevant to the inquiry. It was agreed at the pre-inquiry meeting that parties will have an opportunity to make closing submissions. These ought to focus upon the matters raised at these oral proceedings, and the timing for the exchange of submissions will be agreed at the final session of the inquiry. Mr Jackman and myself have undertaken some unaccompanied site inspections of the area already, and we have circulated details of our proposed accompanied site inspections. We've had some feedback from the parties, and what we would hope to do would be to have the Council agree appropriate rendezvous points and a rough timetable for the various stopping points, if that's possible, and with their agreement, could that be circulated to Mr Dowson, ourselves and Morton Fraser, who are acting for the residents at Nunham?
We'll do that.
Thank you. Before we move on, does anyone have any questions or any other general points to raise in relation to the procedural matters that I've outlined? Okay, if we could move on then to inquiry session 1, which will look at background and context. As set out in the programme, we'll hear from Mr Mundell. We understand that Mr Mundell's time is precious because he has other obligations in the afternoon, so we'll hear from you first. Then we'll hear from Whitesands. Could I ask, just at this point, Mr Dowson, which order you hope to take people in?
Yes, we haven't really agreed. I'm just going to suggest that we work round the table, if that's all right, with Mr. Sherman, Mr. Potts, Mr. Batchy and Mr. Greenwood. Is that okay?
That's fine. Can you give me a very rough idea how long you might take to present each witness? And
well, I think the preconditions are fairly short. I would imagine about 15 minutes would be about right, to maybe 10 to 15 minutes to read out, but then it would depend on maybe questions and things like that, maybe another I'm guessing at 5 to 10 minutes or so.
What we'll do is we'll just keep an eye on things and take a break when we think it's most appropriate this morning. There won't be any witnesses for the council today, but could I ask Mr Connell if you have an anticipated time to cross-examine the witnesses this morning?
Ma'am, I suspect Mr Dowson's estimate for the majority of the witnesses is not far off. The precognitions are relatively short and they're expressing a personal view. So I would anticipate if I have questions for most of these witnesses, they will be relatively few and therefore the time taken relatively short. Mr Dowson had a longer precognition and it may be I have a few more for him, but again I'm not currently anticipating a very long session on that.
Okay, thank you. Before we move on to the first witnesses, what I would like to do is just reassure Mr Mundell and Mr Dowson, who are given evidence on their own and are not being led by an advocate. You will be given the opportunity to make some comments in relation to anything that has been added since recognitions have been submitted, as other witnesses will be given the opportunity to do so via yourselves. So you won't just read out your recognition, you can make some supplementary comments on anything that's arisen. And I also discussed with Mr Dowson, if we finish early today, it would have been nice to try to move on and take Mr Dowson's evidence on technical matters, but that's not going to be practical today. So it's likely that we may have a slightly earlier finish, in which case we will be moving over to the Johnston room in the Holiday Inn tomorrow, so we will go over and have a look at the room this afternoon and we will commence there tomorrow morning at 9:30. Okay, if I could ask Mr Mundell to come to the witness table please and read out your recognition.
Thank you very much, and can I put on my thanks at this early stage to the report, my thanks on the record at this early stage to the reporters for their flexibility. This scheme is unfit for purpose, too expensive, and does not enjoy widespread community support. Dumfries has experienced regular flooding for generations, and local residents and businesses have grown used to mitigating and managing the effects, therefore bringing into question the way in which the Council have rushed ahead with a single design. It is the most unpopular project I have come across during my time in politics, and I would ask the reporters to reflect on the level of opposition there is to £25 million plus of government investment. Thousands of residents oppose this design, and for good reason. There are other less intrusive options which could be and should be considered. Why they have not been properly looked at is anyone's guess. At the very least, I believe the consultation process has been defective and should be rerun in order to properly evaluate local opinion. Ultimately, like many people living locally, I would rather see no scheme at all than the wrong one, and I have lost confidence in the Council's ability to deliver this project. Ultimately, the fact that local elected representatives from the Council administration and senior officers are not making the case for this scheme themselves and are instead hiding behind expensive lawyers funded by the taxpayer is a disgrace. I believe they want the Scottish Government to assume responsibility for something they know is not supported and not wanted. Given the considerable inequality in resources and the noted desire of the reporters to avoid repetition, my intention is to focus my efforts on putting a number of questions to Dumfries and Galloway Council and their witnesses, in line with my inquiry and hearing statements during the appropriate sessions. Finally, I would like to note for the record my disappointment that my fears aired during the initial meeting that the chosen format of the planning inquiry would not make it easy for the voices of local people to be heard have turned out to be correct. I accept this is a separate matter, and I therefore plan to raise it at a later date, regardless of the outcome of the process. In the meantime, I simply want to put on my record my gratitude to the Save Our Sands and other residents and objectors who have put in such a considerable effort into fighting for the future of our town and a bit of common sense. Dumfries deserves a better vision than just a bund, and the regeneration of our town can only be built in collaboration with local residents and traders, not by going back to that time-old mantra that the Council knows best. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mundale. Is there anything that has arisen since the recognitions have been submitted that you would like to bring to our attention?
Yes, there is. I would like to revisit a number of points that were raised yesterday by SEPA. The first point that gave me cause for concern was the indication from SEPA that a flood defence scheme for the Whitesands had appeared on a Scottish Government list, suggesting that a decision at some level had already been taken prior to the completion of the Council's own process. I'm particularly interested to know what the fate of the other 17 projects that were prioritised ahead of it was, and I think that it does to me call into question again the motivations, and it's a point I've raised elsewhere in my hearing statement, but I do think that in part the design for this particular scheme is in part motivated by the availability of government funding, and that the schedule for bringing forward the plans has again been influenced by the time-limited nature of that money. So rather than undertaking a full and proper consultation and going at a pace that allowed people in the town to go on that journey with the Council, they've sought to accelerate and speed things up in order to access that funding. The second point from SEPA's evidence that was of interest to me was the fact they noted that they'd looked at six different, maybe 4 or 5 different sets of analytical data and modelling for the river. My understanding from looking at those different models is that they're all different, and I find the idea that we're now basing the calculations for this design on one of those models and discounting the previous ones that have been adjusted somewhat concerning, particularly given that the flooding in 2015, certainly from my research, speaking to a number of people in the town and having read a number of newspaper articles and reviewed some of the documents that Save Our Sands have presented, the flood in 2015 was by no means the worst flood in living memory. And in fact, there are a number of people who point back to some very significant flooding events before that. So if we're calibrating our model based on a single flood event, I don't know that that's the right one to have chosen. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mundale. Some of the topics that you've raised will be addressed at other inquiry sessions, in particular the hydraulic modelling and the justification for the scheme, technical justification for the scheme, will be covered in the coming sessions. The funding of the scheme is, of course, a separate matter from our consideration of the objections into the order, so we don't have any witnesses to respond on those matters. But if you're content, I will now hand over to Mr Connell.
Thank you, ma'am. You've dealt with the issue of funding, and I see no need to say any more about that. That's the Council's position also. It's a separate matter. It's not a matter within the remit of this inquiry. Ma'am, so far as this witness is concerned, and I'll say this now so that I don't have to repeat it later, it's not my intention with a series of witnesses simply to take up inquiry time by taking every sentence or half sentence and putting the negative, simply to have that done, that seems to me to be unnecessary in a process of this kind, and therefore I don't intend to do it. Secondly, the Council obviously respect the entitlement of those such as Mr Mundell who hold elected positions to come to an inquiry like this and express a view. Perfectly entitled to do so, and there's no issue with that at all. And in these circumstances, I simply intend to rely on the substantive evidence lodged and to be given by the Council, and therefore I have no questions for this witness. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Connell. That's much appreciated. Okay, could I turn to Mr Mundell and ask if you have any last points to make?
Yes, I would simply repeat in relation to the financial matters that I do believe they are relevant from our discussions yesterday surrounding the Act, the Flooding Act. You know, there is a strong focus within that legislation on the wider social and economic costs, and I think that one of the balancing decisions the local authority and now Scottish Government ministers have to make is whether or not the scheme as proposed provides value for money and gets that balance right. In my view, there are far less expensive options available. For example, as I stated in my own inquiry statement, building a smaller bund on the opposite side of the road, for example, which would provide some immediate relief to some of the businesses without the disruption and without affecting the setting of a very significant local monument. So I do think that Scottish Government ministers have to give due notice to quite considerable sums of public money that are being spent on something that might not be what the town wants or in keeping with the town's history and traditions.
Thanks, Mr Mundell. I would offer you the opportunity to raise such points in your closing submissions, and those will be taken into consideration when we make our report. Okay, thank you. No questions? Oh, sorry, Mr Jackman has some questions.
How should Scottish ministers know when a major infrastructure project enjoys widespread community support?
I think that's a point that needs to be revisited. One of the suggestions I was very interested in actually came from one of my South of Scotland MSP colleagues, Joe McAlpine, who had a couple of points in time has suggested having some kind of local referendum on this issue, given that it is recognised. I think it's recognised on all sides that at the very least this is a controversial project. If it was unanimously supported and being championed by local people, then we wouldn't have got to this point. I also think they should be looking at the positions local parties took in the run-up to the council elections. My own party, the Conservative Party, were very clear that they opposed this. The Scottish National Party, my understanding going into the local government elections was that they supported sending this to an inquiry, and that was certainly the arrangement they reached with the Labour Party when they joined the administration. That to me doesn't suggest overwhelming support. What we've got is actually a majority of councillors elected at the last council elections who either didn't want the scheme to happen or felt it should go to Scottish Government ministers to decide. And I think for something as important as this, we need to have clarity. I also think Scottish Government ministers should look at the nature of the objections. I think the fact that the people who are most directly affected by this scheme, the traders along the Whitesands, are the ones who are most vocal in their opposition to the scheme. Residents in Nunholm, who according to the council in theory should benefit from this scheme, who currently experience flooding, are the ones who have at their own considerable expense engaged lawyers as well. That to me doesn't it just doesn't have the feel of something that's got widespread support. And actually, in the face of considerable opposition, petitions signed by thousands of people, again, that's another indication. And the flip side of it is there's no one here. We're sat in a public inquiry. We've known about this. It's been in the news over and over again, and we've not seen anyone out campaigning for this scheme. There's no one that I'm aware of, really, in any significant numbers, campaigning and championing it and saying this should go ahead. It just doesn't have the feel to me of something. I think Scottish Government ministers are used to making those kinds of decisions when it comes to policy, and the local authorities should be alive to those concerns as well.
Thank you. Do you think people who live in Dumfries attach special significance to Whitesands as a space, as opposed to just the fact that an outsider might just see it as a car park?
I think they definitely do. And it's used for other things as well. It forms an integral part of the Guide Neighbours celebration. The fair sets up there. It holds a lot of memories for people. People are very attached to the river. The whole town has been formed round about it. We've got a very significant local monument. The Call also is one of the most photographed parts of the river. People like the openness of that space, and I think there are many people in the town who see potential for it. I think car parking is important, and I don't think we've had that properly addressed, and we will come back to that, I know. But I think at the moment, whilst it remains an open space, there's possibilities to do different things with it. And I regularly, myself, when coming into the towns, will stop there and sit for a little while, whether if I make phone calls, other bits, because you see people walking dogs, out with their children. It is in the context, of the town, a nice place to sort of sit and take stock. And I think for people, it's the idea that somehow you want to create a barrier between the town and the river is not attractive. And you've obviously got the Burns Theatre cinema on the other side, and the Greensands, and when you look across the river from the river's edge, you certainly see, I think, a very pleasant view.
And finally, you submitted a number of documents to us, annual reports from the Fishery Trust and the District Salmon Fishery Board. Were there any particular conclusions that you were expecting us to draw from those documents?
I'm hoping to revisit those documents during some of the technical sessions, because I think they speak to the complexity of the river flow, but also when it comes to some of the wider issues around river management, and some of the projects. There's actually been quite significant projects along the River Nith from previous mining in the Kirkconnell and Kellyholme area to a number of wind farms, forestry, other bits and pieces which have had a notable impact on river flow, but also I think call into question some of the claims that are made in relation to sediment flow in other documents, because the river has been subject to pretty significant change across the last half century, and I wouldn't be as confident as the council when it comes to how quickly the gravel traps under the bridge and otherwise would fill up. I had been hoping that it might be possible to bring a witness in relation to that, but it hasn't been possible.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Dyson, could I ask you for your first witness, please?
Could I ask Mr. Brian Sherman to come forward? Okay, are you all right, Brian? Yeah. Brian has a photography business located on the Whitesands. He'll explain, I think, his... Are you okay? Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, John. Good morning, everyone. I do have a business, a photographic studio, based on the Whitesands. I've been there for 35 years. I therefore have a very good insight into both the area's infrastructure and also the local business community's requirements and expectations. I therefore feel qualified in giving an informed opinion regarding the proposed flood defence scheme. There are a number of issues concerning the proposal which I find objectionable. One of my main concerns is the profound impact that the project would have on Whitesands and town centre businesses. The construction period alone of some 2 to 3 years would almost certainly cause traffic confusion and delays. These have all been experienced in the past with much lesser projects, and consequently this leads to a serious loss of trade. Many business owners that I have spoken to would reiterate this point. They and I feel that the long-term implications of the finished bund would at best be detrimental and at worst unsustainable for small business. One of the reasons for this concern is because moving the car parking facilities from the Whitesands to the Greensands area would cause a loss of crucial visitor parking in the centre of the town. Local shoppers may also be reluctant to park in and out of the way area, particularly when it is dark. Having lived in Dumfries for most of my life, the view of the River Nith and the surrounding bridges and buildings are very special to me, as they are to most Doonhamers. I fully understand that the aesthetics of an area can be very subjective, but the idea of building an artificial grass bund and what is historically a shoreline is very objectionable to me. We would be losing one of our most memorable local views. I also have concerns that by raising the river level, even by a small amount, would well lead to the complete collapse of our ancient Devergilla Bridge. I have been surprised in our council's response to the objections to this scheme. Perhaps at the initial planning stage, if they had involved more local businesses and people who were directly affected by the project, they may have respected our concerns better. Their apparent arrogance and increasingly partisan attitude is very disappointing. It's also unclear why the funding for the scheme should be coming from flood protection resources, when clearly it is primarily a landscaping project. The Whitesands is a floodplain. Over the years, local traders have learned to live with that fact. We have learned to plan and take the necessary precautions when required. This situation is far from ideal, but it is surely preferable to putting up a barrier which would be superfluous for 360 plus days of the year and which will cause so much disruption, frustration and potential loss of business for many town traders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sherman. Could you turn your microphone off, please? Thank you, Mr. Sherman. Mr. Dowson, do you have any questions for your witness? Any points?
No, I don't think so. I could just mention that Brian, for some time, was involved with the Federation of Small Businesses. I wondered if he maybe wanted to. He must have had contact with many other businesses, small businesses. I just wondered if he wanted to mention that.
Yes, that's correct, John. For about 8 years, I was chairman of the Federation of Small Businesses for Dumfries and Galloway, and we have about 19, 20 members based on the Whitesands. So I still do have regular contact with them.
Thank you. Mr. Connell, do you have any points?
Ma'am, as this is the first of the Save Our Sands witnesses, I do want to raise ask a general question, and it may be that just because of the order, it may not be Mr. Sherman who's in the hot seat to answer it, but I'll raise it anyway. In a lot of the material which has been produced during the process that we've been undertaking for SOS, there is either explicitly or implicitly support for what I would describe as a do-nothing option. In other words, it's not really that much of a problem. We can cope with it. We've got our gates in place, and so on. And that's certainly the way it has been understood. Now, in the course of yesterday, I thought perhaps the do-nothing option was being taken off the agenda during discussions about options to be replaced by a statement that wasn't the SOS position. So I wanted to raise this at the start of the first witness tendered by this organisation, so I can see whether we need to deal with that or not.
Mr. Dyson, I wonder if that might be something you would wish to address when you give evidence.
Yes, I'd certainly wish to come back to that, yeah.
Mr. Connell, will you be content with that?
I'm happy with that. I just didn't want to be told I should have asked another 3 witnesses exactly the same question when we were dealing with it. I've very little for this witness, ma'am. If you're not, Mr. Chairman, going to adopt the do-nothing approach and just work on that hypothesis for the purpose of this question, you're going to have to put something in place which will keep floodwaters out, and that is going to involve some level of construction. It might depend, no doubt, on the details on that area. So that would be something that is just going to have to happen if you want to remove the threat of flooding, isn't it?
With due respect, sir, the businesses I've spoken to all feel it's preferable to do nothing than to have this scheme put in place for the reasons I explained. I think the whole project is over-engineered. I just do not think that it's required. As I said in my statement, 360 plus days of the year, it's going to be redundant. It's going to sit there. It's going to be an eyesore. It's going to be a potential problem. If you have an elevated walkway over a river, you're asking for problems, I think. And therefore, we feel, I speak collectively from the businesses which I have connection with, that it is completely over-engineered. There may be something we could do. If you look back at photographs of flooding, you'll see that the river very rarely raises above the level of what at the moment is a fence. It's the so it very rarely goes above that level. I've witnessed half a dozen serious floods in 35 years that I've been there, and it very rarely exceeds that level of the fence. Therefore, to put a bund up almost twice as much as that is completely overkill.
But by fence, do you mean the railings?
The railings, sorry, yes, yeah, the railings.
In terms of, just so we perhaps get this out now, and then we won't have to worry about it with other witnesses. You're the guinea pig, Mr. Sherman, because you're up first. We know that the proposed height of the actual raised walkway, I know Save Our Sands always call it a bund, so I'll call it a raised walkway, and we'll not argue about it, is 1.4 metres, on top of which it's proposed there's a 1.1 metre glass panel. So the actual physical blockage, if you like, is only the 1.4 metres. You know that. Yeah. And if you're standing on the street on the opposite side from the car parking, or the majority of the car parking, looking towards the river, you're faced by the existing significant area of car parking that is the main function of the Whitesands. Is that correct? So what you actually see is the cars, isn't it?
No, you see the river. You do not lose the open space feel of the area. you still see the river. You can see the river quite clearly. But taking away the car parking completely, you're going to replace it with what? A green banking?
And just finally, and again, it may avoid repetition later, be it right or be it wrong, we're being told from on high that climate change is going to bring more frequent flooding. That's what we're being told by those who write policy documents are way above our level. So you know to expect more flooding in the future. That would be fair, isn't it?
Can I just say that every business on the Whitesands knows about flooding. And if anybody chooses to go down there and begin a business or run a business from there, they know what to expect. They know it's on a floodplain. It is a floodplain. It always has been. Old photographs and etchings show it's a shoreline. It is actually a shoreline. Therefore, you have to expect it's going to flood. You must take your own precautions. When my own business is halfway up the Whitesands, and fortunately, the front level never actually comes into my business, but it does through Brewery Street, which is the street parallel to the Whitesands. We built a small wall about 2.5 feet high at the back of it, just at the doorway. We've never had any more flooding issues. So it's really up to the businesses to take their own precautions regarding flooding, and most of them do. Most of them do. Therefore, as I say, to put this bund in place would be a complete overkill and over-engineered.
I have nothing further, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Connell. I've got a couple of questions, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind. Okay. You made mention of community engagement. Did you participate in any of the community engagement events? And if so, was there an opportunity at that point to make your views known about the impacts on your business?
By community engagement, do you mean with the council?
I mean the formal community engagement procedures that the council undertook, including the baker's oven and the charrettes, etc.
Yes, I did. There was no options given. It was only the one yes or no project. At that particular time, I don't think it was clear to businesses the implications that it would have.
Thank you. On average, how long would you say your business is disrupted during flood events, and are the impacts of a major storm significantly different?
Probably within 2 to 3 days. Most of the time a flood will be up probably 1 to 2 days. It then takes maybe a day or so to clear up. The road is closed for a period of possibly 2 days maximum.
Can you tell me in a wee bit more detail in what ways your business is actually affected by the disruption that's caused?
The disruption through flooding, you mean? Okay. It's just, when any road closes, obviously you're going to lose passing trade. But my own particular business isn't really affected too badly with it. Other businesses, if it's a retail business, it probably would have more significant effect. But as I say, my own business isn't really affected by it.
One last point from me. You mentioned the use of the Whitesands car park and that's out of the way. What is your experience of the level of usage? I know car parking is something that we'll deal with later, but given that you're here for this session, I just wondered what your experience is of the current levels of usage of the Whitesands car park.
Minimal, I would think. There's very few people that I know use it. And my main concern is the fact that when visitors come through the town, if they come through the Whitesands, there's obviously car parking available. They'll stop. If they then get redirected to an out-of-the-way place, They're not going to stop. They're just going to go right through the town onto possibly Castle Douglas or Dalbeattie or some other out place. I'm also concerned that the fact that where the green sands is, it's so out of the way that local people I don't think would use it at night time. It's a possible problem that people would actually use that at night time, just because it's so out of the way.
I've nothing further.
Just one question. I'm sure you heard me ask Mr. Mundell about how people in Dumfries feel about the Whitesands as a space. What's your opinion on that?
Well, again, it's a very special place for people that live in the town. They hold fairs there. It's a good centre for the Gyd Nibra celebrations, firework displays. It could be used a lot more. It could certainly be used a lot more. In the past, it's been used as a market. That market could be extended. But it's just a very special area for people in Dumfries. It's the Whitesands. People know it. They enjoy the openness of it, and to restrict it, I think, would be a major cause of concern for them.
Okay, I have nothing further. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman.
Could I?
Sorry.
Could I just? Am I allowed to? Well, I'm seeking clarification about a point made about the bund being 1.4 metres high. That is not a view that is shared by us. In our view, the barrier is 2.5 metres high. The fact that glass panels are on top of it in a structure we haven't seen details of. We don't know just how that will be. And a glass barrier only works if it is spotlessly clean. So to suggest that the visual impairment of the river is only 1.4 metres high, we would challenge, and we state clearly that it's 2.5 metres high. But we do not accept that.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Dyson. I think that is a topic that's going to be discussed at the both visual and heritage and other sessions later on, if that's okay. Could I have your next witness, please?
Mr. Potts, to come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Potts. If you want to just read your recognition now, please.
I have been the owner of the Cafe Piccolo in the Whitesands for 20 years, and a business that has been established for over 60 years. My business employs 5 of its staff at present and trades successfully year on year. Over the years, we have experienced several floods, some worse than others. Our premises have been modified to deal with this problem by electrical sockets being placed at a high level, fridges and freezers lifted permanently off the floor and mounted on trestles. The flooring is of solid tile construction and all other surfaces are waterproof and easily cleaned. This means that if our premises flood even for a few hours, when the water declines, we can clean up and be back in business within 24 hours. When we flood, it is essential that we remain with our premises, as we need to be present to decide if we need to move any expensive machinery. This can be done with assistance from staff if required. Over the 28-year period, although we have been threatened with flooding on many occasions, we have only actually had water into the premises, on 5 occasions. This is only about once every 4 years. I accept that there is an element of disruption even when a flood comes close. However, I would rather have this short-term inconvenience and have my business disrupted for 365 days a year by the loss of car parking, bus flow and river views. The real threat to my business is not short-term flooding, but the long-term impact of an insensitive design. I consider the Council's proposal will be extremely damaging to any passing trade which I currently rely on. Access to buses and car parking are absolutely essential for my business. I feel that I have a responsibility to try and protect my business and the jobs of my loyal staff who have worked with us over many years. Since I became involved in the Save Our Sands campaign, I've been upset and angry about the manner in which we have been treated by councillors and council officials. In particular, I refer to an article in the local paper which described us as dishonest because we had organised a petition against the scheme. There was no need for that kind of language to be used or to treat anyone like that. We are entitled to express our opinion and expect it to be listened to with respect. This kind of treatment has gone on from the start and is still going on. On another occasion, when we finally met with the council, we were requested not to stop speaking to the press. One official said to my wife, "Why are you complaining when we only need to look at the kind of car you're driving?" Recently, I was told that if my calf was no longer required, I could turn it into a keep fit gymnasium. I cannot understand why, when there are so many people against this scheme and sign petitions, that the council are so dogmatic and blinker about their scheme. They want to force this scheme through despite all public objections and petitions. Many of my regular customers are elderly and they use my calf as a cosy place to wait for their bus or their taxi. A large number of our customers signed the petition against the council scheme and are clearly concerned about changes to bus routes, car parking and to the Devergilla Bridge. We have heard that it's to be a compensation scheme, but we've had no information about how this will work. Compensation is no good if you're already driven out of business. I'm not just worried about the construction period of over 2 to 3 years, but I'm worried about the long-term future for the businesses. If these changes are made, this will destroy the footfall in front of my business. I have daily experience of the poor maintenance of the Whitesands at the moment, and I have no confidence in the council to properly maintain such a scheme, particularly as it involves large sections of steel and glass. Even their ability to cut the grass regular is debatable. I have travelled extremely extensively through the United Kingdom in my life, and most successful small towns make the most of the river as a main feature. It is important that as many people as possible can actually see the river and our historical bridge. The council proposals will completely block the views of the river from the proximity of premises, and the Devergilla Bridge will not be able to be seen at all, as this is hidden behind new steps and slopes. I expect the bund and panels will in time become an eyesore, blocking off our most important assets, a river and bridge. I believe that the changes to the car parking are unnecessary, but are designed to maximise grant money from the Scottish Government. This is all caused by the bund design taking up so many valuable parking spaces. We are told that this scheme will regenerate Dumfries Town Centre, but I can see no evidence of this being true. It will certainly not regenerate the Whitesands. I am disappointed in many of local councillors who have allowed our council to be taken over by officials. Over the last 6 years, while this scheme has been designed, I have received no formal visits from any member of the design team to ask our respect or ask a formal, from any member of the design team to ask or respect my opinion. I think we have experienced total disrespect rather than respect, and that is unacceptable to me as a taxpayer. My business is in the front line of threats from flooding. The council state that their design is to protect my business, but in 6 years they could not even come and talk to me. What kind of way is that for a council to behave? I feel that the career development of professionals and consultants has prevailed over the need to listen to ordinary people. Other options seem to have been dismissed unfairly and needed to be looked at again in one more detail. On every occasion, we were only shown one design, and this was pushed at us relentlessly. Any other opinion was immediately dismissed or disregarded. I attended the public meeting where Mr. Frank Kelly displayed other options which had 100% support that evening, but I noticed that no council officials attended. There was over 150 members of the public at that meeting. I want to tell the inquiry about the stress and uncertainty that has been caused by this process to me, my family and my employees. It is difficult enough to keep a small business successful without being able to properly plan ahead for investment and new equipment, etc. This has now been going on for years. When will it end? Will it ever end? What will we be left with? The council say that there will be an increased footfall in the Whitesands, but I do not believe this, and there is no proof that this will ever be delivered. For instance, where will all these extra people park? Where will they come from? Why would they want to visit a site where the river is blocked from view? In all the plans I have seen, there is a massive lack of detailed information on how this whole scheme would be constructed. For example, we have no idea of where and when the construction would start or finish, or any phasing of any works. We are left completely in the dark about these important details. I feel disappointed and let down by the total lack of respect that has been given to me and my colleagues as other human beings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Potts. Mr. Desson, do you have any points to raise for Mr. Potts?
Not really, no. I think Mr. Potts has said that very well.
Mr. Connell?
Did you attend any of the events that were held by the council over the period of years, Mr. Potts? Because obviously you've got strong views as you're entitled to have, and that was an opportunity where you could attend and discuss it, was it not?
Yes, I've been at some of them.
And so far as buses are concerned, you know that bus stops are going to remain on the Whitesands even under the proposed scheme, so your customers will still be able to wait for a bus or a taxi as before. Is that correct?
Not really, no.
Why do you say buses aren't going to be available for your customers after the scheme?
Well, are you familiar with them, please? Have you had a look round? I think I saw you walking about one day. No, I'm asking for a reason. Because where the bus stops are at the moment, ain't going to be there. They're going to be further down. On the plan I was shown.
I think my point simply was that it's still intended that there should be bus stops on the Whitesands, and that parking on the side nearest the shops will remain afterwards. So the example you gave of somebody waiting for a bus or a taxi will still be possible under the new scheme.
No, because I look out the window to see where the buses are coming from, and it's way further down. The Sands is about half a mile long.
This is, ma'am, before I get told I'm going into a topic which is out with the remit of the inquiry, I think the reporters are aware that among the materials there is a note of a proposed advance payment scheme for compensation. Now, compensation, of course, is set out by the Act, by Parliament, and therefore is not for this inquiry to determine. But there is a scheme for advance payment. So I'm just raising it now since this witness has raised it. you have no jurisdiction over it, but it's there.
One of the council witnesses, understand, will be raising that as mentioned in their recognition. I understand we've got the opportunity that today we have some of the business representatives from the Whitesands, so there is some value in some of the questions being raised. But what I would say is that that is a separate matter from our consideration of the order. However, there will be the opportunity for Mr Dyson to raise the topic about the impacts on the town centre in the session that's to be held next week, if Mr Dyson's content with that.
Thank you, ma'am. Sorry,
Mr Potts.
I mentioned compensation in the statement, but I don't want anything for nothing. I want to protect what I've got. I've worked till I was 12-year-old. I'm now nearly 70. I want to work for what I am, not have a handout.
Okay, thanks, Mr Potts. Mr Connell, do you have any further questions?
Just I think perhaps one more, ma'am, about a third of the way down your statement, Mr Potts, you in this paragraph that starts, I accept. Third line there, you talk about loss of car parking, bus flow and river views. It'd be fair to say that car parking and river views have been the big themes of the Save Our Sands campaign. Isn't that fair?
Yes, and mine as well.
The big complaint is that what's at the moment a substantial car park is going to be removed.
Car park's going to be removed. Bus stops in that area are going to be removed. They're really no leaving much left up there.
Thank you, ma'am. I have nothing further.
Thanks, Mr Connell. Mr Potts, I've got a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind. Please forgive me if I duplicate some of the questions, but I think it's important that I ask each of the traders some of the questions. We've mentioned that you did have the opportunity to participate in some of the community engagement activities. Did you feel you got the opportunity at that point in time to raise your concerns about the impacts on your business?
Well, not really, because any time you raised any impact, you got brushed off with that one.
Was the questionnaire designed to allow you to make comments on those sorts of impacts? You know, the feedback forms, did they facilitate your ability to raise concerns?
If you want the honest truth, I can't remember that far back as far as the form's concerned, because this has been going on that long.
Okay, you mentioned that you are often back in business within 24 hours of a flood event. Does that represent the average time that you're affected by a flood? And again, would that increase for a larger storm event?
No, the last large one was, I can't remember, just a couple of years ago, was the worst one I'd had. And what happens is when you've got a flood, when the water starts to decline, the shop empties, the water goes back out, you're only left with the salts and the sand and etc. And what you do is you just clean up. As I told the council on many occasions, I'd rather us have a flood prevention scheme at all. No, to this anyway. I'd rather slop out, clean up and slop out and get on with it. And it takes you've got your staff in, and you disinfect a bit, you clean it up, and you put a dehumidifier in to draw the dampness out of the walls, and then everything's designed, as I said, up off the floors, so you don't get any damage to machinery. So you're up and going within 24 hours, easy.
Okay. There's been a couple of points where you mentioned footfall and passing trade. Can you estimate how much your business is reliant on tourism or passing trade and how much is regular custom?
Well, this time of the year I eat bread and pudding, and this summer I eat strawberry and cream, that tells you.
And finally, can I just ask you, you noted the views of the Devergilla Bridge and the Whitesands. How important do you think those views are to your customers?
A lot of my customers are elderly and remember the sands in the good days when all the buses were parked down there and one thing or another, and it sticks in their mind, and they're like anything else. All people don't like change, including me.
Thanks, Mr. Potts. Mr. Jackman?
If there was a flood protection scheme built, how would that change how you ran? How would it change the precautions you would take?
It depends on how successful it would be, but it's the only thing that I really have to do in the event of a flood is lift stock clear of the floors and heavy machinery, which is expensive machinery, but you lift it up off the floor, and maybe not a sleepless night being down there, because we don't lift the machinery unless we're certain it's going to be coming in, and then you've got very little time to lift it. So it doesn't really make that big a difference whether I had a flood scheme or not, if you want the truth, but it would be nice to have something that everybody would be happy with, but that's not the way life is it?
Mr. Dyson, do you have any final points? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Potts. Could I ask for the next witness, please?
Thank you very much.
Could I introduce Mr. Peter Batchy?
Thanks, Mr. Batchy. If I could just ask you to read your recognition.
Can you hear me okay now? Okay. Thanks everyone for hearing me out today. My name is Peter Batchy. I've been a news agent on the Whitesands for 31 years. Prior to that, I had a catering shop on the Whitesands for 10 years. I have seen most of what has gone on the Whitesands over the time that I've been there and experienced many different floods, including the worst flood ever, 1977. Firstly, I would like to talk about community engagement. The Council has never, to my knowledge, consulted me directly on my experiences during the time that I have worked on the Whitesands. No one has ever come to my shop to formally consult with me on the Whitesands development. As I stated in my original objection, Carlisle Council engaged with the public by inviting them to Carlisle Racecourse to get the public's view on the way forward. They consulted widely with the community to see the solutions that would meet community need. On the other hand, I attended on the day that the Council hosted a charrette in 2012. It was clear to me that the Council had only one scheme in mind. I cannot recall the charrette discussing any other design option, and I feel that we're being led towards the raised walkway solution. The only consultation information events that I have attended were about promoting the Council design solution. I think you've heard this before, but it's in my report. Our fellow witness, David Slater, invited flood barrier expert Frank Kelly to talk about alternative rising wall solution. Over 100 people 150 people attended that event. We had a show of support for the self-rising barrier of 150 hands from attendees at that meeting. Not one council official chose to attend that event. Only the Provost of Dumfries at the time, Ted Thompson, attended. I am aware that Peter Marchant and Oliver Femont will be discussing rising wall alternatives in more detail. I believe this option was never given a chance to be properly considered by either the public or the elected councillors. Not one of my customers has ever expressed support for the council scheme. There has been no true engagement. I was only able to attend 2 Save Our Sands meetings with the council. Both meetings were unsatisfactory and showed little respect for our point of view. I got the feeling that the council officers had little respect for our opinions. I will defer to David Coulter here, who I am aware will be discussing the concept of true community engagement detail. Secondly, I would like to talk about the practicalities of the bund. My experience of council's ability to respond to flood warnings in the past has been very poor. In years gone by, the council provided very little help. Sandbags are a prime example. We've always had to go and collect sandbags in the past ourselves, and then it takes them weeks to remove them, even though there's a health hazard. In terms of the council's record responding to floods, I am therefore very doubtful of the council's ability to be able to put the additional 200 panels up in time. I'm worried these panels will never be deployed or left in place for days after the event, or put up and left up, which is a worst-case scenario. The bund will also cause problems in the winter, when the cold weather and frost on the ground makes the bund dangerous for the public. At the moment, they don't even salt the Evergiller Bridge. During flood warnings, they simply close it. Therefore, will they simply close the whole of the Whitesands? In particular, will the raised walkways be safe for pedestrians in cold weather? My experience of the council's track record of maintenance makes me certain that the bund will very quickly deteriorate into an eyesore. I would now like to talk about the impact of my business. Only this is my opinion after what I've heard a few minutes ago about buses. The removal of the turning circle for buses will mean that the buses will no longer be using the sands as a bus station, which will reduce the number of people spending time on the sands, which will significantly impact on my business. I've not spoken to one professional bus driver who doesn't think where they intend to put the buses, halfway up Bank Street, make them turn into Irish Street down and turn round again. My feeling is after 6 months, if the bund goes ahead, the council will say, this is too dangerous, there'll be no buses on the sands either. Ditto, job done, bund up, car parking gone, buses gone. Again, this is my opinion. Of all the alternative systems that I've seen will have less of an impact on my business whilst has been constructed, other systems can be built in a shorter time period with less disruption. For example, 3 years ago, Scottish Water replacing the water pipes at my business and at least halved during that period. That was only a year in duration, whereas the council scheme is estimating a 2 or 3 year build. If it's a 2 or 3 year build, you might have a scenario where at the end of building a flood defence, there may be no more businesses left to defend. Finally, I would like to address the amount of money being spent to fight the people of Dumfries. To me, it seems entirely unjustified that the council would spend hundreds of thousands of pounds to fight against their own people. We have had to raise money ourselves to be able to put together a case to defend the views of 6,000 plus signatories who signed the petition against the scheme, whereas the council are spending our own money against us. I would like to end by calling for the council to put aside your pride and start to listen to the people of Dumfries. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Batchy. Mr. Dyson? Mr. Connell?
So far as the issues raised about what I might describe as transport and traffic, I'm conscious of the session on that later, and Mr. Dowson will no doubt have an opportunity of raising questions on that. So I don't think it will take up time dealing with the interesting suggestion that what's put forward is a sort of front for some other scheme to remove buses from the sands. I really then only have one question, Mr. Batchy. You've clearly got strong views, and you're entitled to have strong views and to come here and express them. There's no debate about that. there have been a number of events run over the years that this has been going on, which have at least allowed people to turn up and express views in one way or the other. Have you taken advantage of that?
Could you just explain that again to me? I just didn't quite the answer. Sorry. Okay.
I apologise. It may have been too long a question. I'll start again. During the time in which this scheme has been under preparation and discussion, which we're all... Could you put your microphone off? And then
sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. It's easily forgotten. I've done it myself. During the time when this scheme has been under consideration, which has gone on for a period of years, as you will know better than many people, there have been a number of what we'll just call engagement events, and I'm not going to get into a debate about that because others are going to deal with it. Events at which people are going to come along and hear what's going on and express views in one form or another. Have you taken an opportunity of expressing your views at these events?
I've attended most of the events over the period I've been in the Whitesands over many years, including a £2 million wall that was built of EU money over 22 years ago. You were down the sands yourself. You saw the state of that now, no doubt. I know it's slightly off your question, sir, but yes, I've attended as many events as I could. And I was disappointed, as I said in my statement, that the one proposal always seems to have been the only one on the table.
I have nothing further, ma'am.
Okay, just a couple of questions for you, Mr. Batchy. You noted that you felt that the charrette led you towards the raised walkway solution. Did you have an opportunity to express that opinion at that point in time?
Not really, because we weren't listened to, basically.
But did you make your concerns known at that point in time?
I actually took a photograph, which I have here, of another system in Lytham and St Anne's, and it was just flung away, basically.
Okay. Can I ask you, on average, how long your business is disrupted during flood events and whether or not those impacts are greater for a large flood event?
Yes, for sure. I can spend up to 10 hours on my premises trying to keep the water out. I've been successful. I haven't been as successful. The main disruption to the business is the road's closed, obviously, and if it's so severe that the electricity goes off, you have no option but to close. But we're all hardy down the sands. We know the procedures for when the flooding comes, and we all try our best and help each other in that moment of crisis to do our best for each other. I will admit that the last flood, the council did improve its help. I'm not denying that they did help a lot better than has done in the past. So we try and keep it to a minimum, but when you're in the retail trade, like my colleague Brian said, his trade's different, it's more internet, my trade is retail, so, you know, if the road's closed and the electricity is off, I don't have any option. But we try and keep it to a day and a half, most 2 days.
Could you also describe for me in a little bit more detail how your business is actually affected by a flood event?
Sorry, how it's affected by a flood event?
Just in terms of your customers, you know, what is are you in a similar position to Mr. Potts in that you depend to a large extent on passing trade? Very similar,
very similar. If a lot of my trade is people drawing up outside in their car, coming in for the newspaper, coming in for whatever, and then driving off. Obviously, when the road's closed, that's not possible.
In your statement, you said when Scottish Water were doing some improvements that your business was halved. Is that the turnover during that time?
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
And was that because people couldn't physically get into your shop, or was it because they were put off because of the works?
It was both. It was both.
Thank you. And you've heard me ask other witnesses, and I'd be interested in your view. Do you think the people of Dumfries attach special significance to the Whitesands as a place, as opposed to it just being a car park? What did you think?
Well, I can give you an instance, sir, whereby in 2008 we did a different petition, and we got nearly 4,000 signatures, and it was called Keep Our Buses on the Sands. And we got 4,000 signatures. We won that one. The buses were still on the sands. So to get into your question, everyone relies on the Whitesands for a variety of reasons. And it's a vocal point for the buses, for the cars. And if you look at the rest of Dumfries town, at least with the cars and the Whitesands, it looks vibrant in the summer. People come by and say, well, let's stop there, because it looks vibrant and it's next to the river. So I would say yes, it is a very important point for the people of Dumfries, the Whitesands.
Thank you. And finally, you don't need to worry about this, but before us we have evidence of the history of authorities looking at flood defence schemes in the Whitesands. And in the 80s, the then Dumfries and Galloway Regional Council had a look at the problem, and reports were prepared. And the ultimate outcome from that in the 80s was to decide to not do any flood defence schemes, but to rely on a flood warning system. What's your view, reflecting on that strategic choice, just to rely on a flood warning? Was that a wise choice, do you think?
Well, in years gone by, before SEPA was invented, the police would always phone you to say there's an flood coming. Going back to the wall I mentioned earlier, when we knew that was going to be erected along the sands, we tried to get the council then to try and replace the railings with the wall. But we were told, because it was EU money, it was to be cosmetic only. And we tried very hard to try and incorporate that into some sort of flood prevention, but again it was flung out. My personal view is, I don't want to guess, a wall the size of the railings would stop 90% of the floods in the sands, having been in the sands 41 years. Thank you. Is that okay?
Thanks, Mr. Batchey. Mr. Dyson, do you have any points for Mr. Batchey? No. No? Okay, thank you very much. Can we move on to the next witness, please? Mr. Greenwood?
Yeah. Could I introduce Mr. John Greenwood from 252 Spares to come in, and John's in the interesting position that his particular property is the property that will probably flood first in any flood, I think.
Thanks, Mr. Greenwood. If I could just ask you to read your recognition, please.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. The business of 252 Spares, of which I am an owner, is situated in the most flood-prone building in Dumfries Township. My family has owned the business for 30 years. In every instance of the Rivernith flooding in Dumfries, the building is the first to be surrounded by floodwaters. As a result of the flooding, the business has developed a flood prevention system to prevent inundation of the building. For example, we use a flood barrier and doors, an electronic pumping system, use of an upstairs floor for stock and equipment storage, and a backup petrol-driven system for electricity generation and floodwater pumping. We also make significant use of the SEPA warning system, including river level information, in keeping us prepared. All minor floods, and I would suggest they're approximately less than 1.2 meters water depth at the front door, that's the height of our barrier, they're successfully kept out, with the occasional low-level flooding due to seepage through foundations and from adjoining buildings. Even in the major floods, 2009, 2011, 2013, 2015, the impact has been minimized using flood defences, to the extent that there has been no major stock or equipment loss despite water ingress since 2009. During a minor flood, the impact on business operations is negligible. Phones and other lines of communications can be maintained. Wading through low-level floodwaters to receive and deliver goods is usually possible. The direct financial loss to the business on these occasions is minimal and can be directly attributed to lack of easy access and perception of the extent of the flooding by customers. In case of a major flood, the impact is greater due to the possible loss of power, road closures, media reporting, and reinstatement of stock and equipment and clean-up operations. In order to combat the potential devastating effect of loss of power and therefore loss of water pumping ability, the business has installed its own generator system and petrol-driven pumping system based on the upper floor. Depending on timing and the amount of water ingress, the impact on business operations could last for up to 2 to 3 days, in the worst case. Despite the impacts described above, I am absolutely opposed to the currently proposed flood protection scheme. The principal reasons for the opposition are as follows. Firstly, it should be noted that at no time has the Council directly, formally approached me to consult on the flood protection scheme. Had they consulted with us, they may then understand the impact I believe the scheme will have on the business. They may also have understood that had they explored other schemes, I would have been very enthusiastic about supporting an alternative design. I defer to David Coulter at a later stage, however, who I know will be discussing the community engagement in more depth. Without exception and without preemptive discussion, not one of our customers or visitors to the premises has expressed support for the scheme. In fact, many have visited with the express purpose of speaking out against the scheme, in many cases without prior knowledge of our viewpoint. Secondly, I would note the business disruption that is inevitable if the scheme goes ahead. The Council have published an estimated time frame for the work to be undertaken. This seems to extend to between 2 and 3 years. Given the relatively small impact of a major flood, it's expected that the impact of major works would be fatal to the business. This would be due in part to traffic disruption for customers, suppliers and delivery drivers from freight companies. Negative impact can be demonstrated by analysis of business during flood events and public events such as fairground visitation and Big Burn Supper. Other traffic disruption such as bridge maintenance or general roadworks also has an impact. To be very brutally honest, I've no confidence in the Council's ability to manage traffic within the area, and for our business, the access is essential. When the fair is in town, customers don't contact us because they know they won't be able to get to us. When the bridge was painted, customers chose to go to businesses outside of town instead. So imagine the impact over a 2 or 3 year period. There are no details of how traffic will be managed during the scheme's construction. Neither are there any details of any possible compensation. Now, I know that was raised just before, so I won't go into that unless I'm asked about it. Once customers leave the business to use more convenient competitors, it would be extremely difficult to re-engage with those customers. I'm certain that the disruption caused by the council design would close our business. I would now like to address my concern around loss of car parking. The Whitesands car park is the most popular and convenient of all of Dumfries town centre car parking. Any disruption to this car park causes interruption to town centre businesses. Moving a large part of the car park away from the Whitesands on a permanent basis will no doubt cause further and continuous interruption. Many customers and visitors have expressed their concerns about this in particular and have suggested that it would likely prevent them from visiting the town centre if avoidable. If they were intending to collect a package from us and they can't park in the car park outside, then they'll drive to an out-of-town business where they can park outside. The Whitesands provides a scenic and convenient hub for locals and visitors. Placing a permanent barrier between the visual amenity that consists of the River Nith, its Call and Devergilla Bridge will destroy this dynamic hub. I'd like to now address my concerns about the bund wall itself, or the flood defence scheme as others would call it. The cost of simply maintaining the proposed bund will be significantly many times more than any post-flood clean-ups currently undertaken. Having an awareness of the materials being used in the building of the bund, i.e. grass that will be cut, trees that will need pruned, glass that will need cleaned, graffiti removed, it's clear that the cost of that will be extensive. The cost of installing temporary panels onto the bund barrier walls will also be significant and, in my mind, raises many unanswered engineering and logistical questions. Finally, it appears to me that the Council have not demonstrated any meaningful or proper consideration of any other type of flood defence scheme. Schemes such as those to be discussed later by Peter Marchant and Oliver Fairmont have been pushed aside. We have never been asked our opinion on any alternative. The proposed scheme's estimated cost is a significant imposition on the public purse. Given the current council budget, I have no confidence in their ability to justify the spend, even with an 80% grant available. To sum up, I would rather nothing was done than this current scheme, because the costs to us as a business is the difference between fatally wounded and temporarily injured. A flood causes a temporary problem. A scheme that closes down the business is irreparable.
Thank you, Mr. Greenwood. Mr. Dyson, do you have any points?
I wondered if you would allow Mr. Greenwood to tell us about one incident. He mentioned there he has his own flood prevention arrangements in the building, and he stays in there because your building does flood first, and he's always on site. And I just would be grateful if you would allow us to just describe what was it during the flood in 2013, quite recently. Would that be allowed?
Mr. Connell, do you have any objections to that?
No.
Well, it's like a wee story, really, but it may well be relevant, especially to elements of this later on. So in 2015, in fact, I'd called to be removed from the building with my young daughter and father because the flooding was becoming particularly concerning. It was rising fast as the tide was going out, which is highly unusual. So the logical conclusion was that being as the floodwaters were still rising quickly, the tide, once it turned and began to come back in again, would have an even more significant impact. We were cold, wet and tired, and really thought we'd best be out of there. Of course, that was going to be difficult, and we were told that we'd have to wait for quite some time because the rescuers were otherwise engaged elsewhere in the district, in fact in many places. We were okay with that. We just had to move ourselves upstairs and eat the one apple we had between us. Anyway, as time went on and as the tide changed and began to come back in again, the floodwaters unexpectedly began to recede. Now, we were quite gobsmacked by this, particularly my father, who has spent 30 years on the Whitesands. And so I called and suggested that we no longer would need to be rescued from the building. I was told under no circumstances would we be allowed to leave because we asked to be rescued, and so we remained and watched the floodwaters continue to recede despite the tide coming in, and it was quite a high-level tide. In the end, the rescuers came along, and in fact I waded out with 4 big burly guys stood around me, which was somewhat embarrassing in front of the cameras. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but the reason for the receding of the waters was that a lot of flood bankings had burst upstream, and so it dissipated the floodwaters due into Dumfries. So the meeting of the tides and the significant amount of floodwater coming down the river did not, in fact, impact in the way we might have expected. I suppose the conclusion for me for that is that upstream, what occurs does have a very significant effect on the impacts on our businesses. I don't believe that the impacts there have been properly researched and taken into account in the case of this particular scheme.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Greenwood. Mr. Connell, would you like to respond?
Thank you, ma'am. No, I won't ask you about compensation. We'll deal with that later. Mr. Greenwood and Mr. Dowson will get a chance. That was the 2015 flood you were just talking about.
I do apologise, being a little nervous. It was the 2013 flood that I was talking about. Mr. Dowson was correct.
No. In any event, the 2015 one, you remember, that's probably the most recent of the larger floods, if I can call it that. You remember that one? Now, I'm told, and we'll get this in the technical sessions later on, that was about a 1 in 30-year event. And you know, we're looking at a scheme here which has the capability of dealing with, the Council's position is that it has the capability of dealing with events up to 1 in 75-year event, which would be much higher than that. And that would cause you the kind of problems, would it not, that you've just described to us, needing effectively to be rescued if you're still on the premises. A much bigger flood.
I think that there's a slight difference between needing to be rescued and wanting to be rescued, perhaps, as I'm sure you appreciate. And you're quite right, were a flood to be larger than the one that we experienced in 2015, it would cause us significant issues. However, we believe that we would be capable of substantially defending the business against that, and we're set up so that we would not suffer any stock or equipment damage during such an event.
And effectively what you've done very helpfully in your recognition is you've set out in some detail all the various steps that you've taken in your premises and with your business to deal with flooding. That's what you've set out in your recognition. and presumably would therefore agree that if an effective flood protection system was in place, these steps would be unnecessary.
If the flood protection scheme worked correctly, perhaps so. It concerns me that were there overtopping of failed engineering, then the scheme would be very necessary that we have in place. If there was some other ingression of waters, the scheme would be even more necessary, because those waters would perhaps, and as far as I know, the engineering hasn't been finalised, they would perhaps stay around for much, much longer on the Whitesands.
I just want to make sure I understand the evidence that you've given to assist the reporters. So please correct me if I'm not expressing your position in the way you want. Having explained all the steps that you take because of the flooding, you then go on to, I think, say that you're concerned about the construction period of the proposed flood defence scheme causing difficulties to your business. Is that fair?
Yes, it is fair.
And are you aware that the intention is to keep the road open during construction and to retain the ability, for instance, of people to park at local businesses?
I'm well aware of the intention. However, our experiences of, as I did mention, any form of works or disruption are such that it still has a significant impact, and traffic flow is, even for small incidents, somewhat disturbed.
And I think you also accept that one of the impacts, if there is flooding, quite apart from the physical impact on your building, is that customers may be put off either because they think they can't get there or because they see it on the television and worry about coming into Dumfries and similar situations like that. Is that fair?
That is correct, yes.
Now, you've heard, I'll just ask you a similar question to the other witnesses, if you don't mind. You know that there were a number of events, and I'll just use events as a nice neutral term so we don't get into debates about charrettes and so on. There were a number of events during the period during which this scheme has been moving to where we are now, held to discuss matters, to publicise it. Did you participate in any of these?
Yes, I participated in, as far as I'm aware, all of them, except for the original charrette event. I must admit that I found them somewhat intimidating. However, I did express my views and put those in writing where that was available to me.
Thank you very much. Paragraph 15 of your recognition, you set out in some detail the issues that you have because you think there's going to be a loss of convenient car parking. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
But for a business like yours, is it not car parking on the side of the road nearer to your business which is important so that people can turn up and collect items or drop them off?
Yes, it is important. However, when that car park is completely overfull and people are driving about looking for spaces there because large amounts of other nearby parking have been taken away, then I don't think that really helps.
I have nothing further, ma'am.
Thanks, Mr. Connell. A couple of questions, Mr. Greenwood. You've obviously gone to quite a lot of trouble to make your property and your business flood resistant. Has having to take those sorts of precautions ever put you off staying at Whitesands, and has that changed over recent years?
Yes, it has put me off. Quite seriously, I don't like it one little bit. No one enjoys a flood. No one enjoys the impacts that it has on the business. And if I felt it convenient and financially viable, then I'd probably move away as soon as I possibly could. I know some of my colleagues won't want to hear that, but you know, I really don't enjoy flooding as it currently occurs.
You've described in quite some detail how your business is affected by the flood events. Can I just check that in most occasions it's a 2 to 3 day period of disruption that you face?
No, it isn't 2 or 3 days in most cases at all. It's very rarely that long. It's been a little over 2 days on 2 occasions that I've been involved with. Most flooding we're operating during the flood and continue to operate, perhaps not to the same level as we would otherwise. And most occasions our clean-up takes less than half a day.
So the 2 to 3 days you mentioned is a worst case scenario generally?
That's correct.
Given the location of your particular premises, I would say that you're fairly well placed to view the parking on Whitesands, and you've quite good experience compared to other people in the room. I'm just wondering if you can share what's your experience of the level of use of parking at Whitesands in recent years, and whether you've noticed any decrease.
I'm not quite sure of the nature of the question. Have I noticed decreasing in parking of the Whitesands?
The reason I ask, obviously we're going to consider parking and impacts in the town centre at later sessions, but one of the recognitions does mention that there has been traffic surveys of Dumfries, and I'm just wondering what you have witnessed in terms of the level of usage of Whitesands car park, and whether there has been any change over recent years.
I haven't noticed any change in the car parking on the Whitesands. It varies, but mostly seems to be full to me. There is a paid-for car parking set just off the Whitesands. The level of parking in that varies greatly also. During any event, I could say that the difference would be that paid-for car park is absolutely full when the other car parking is in any way disrupted. For example, when the fair's in town.
Just one last question from me. You've noted that you would very enthusiastically support an alternative design. Now, obviously, you're here as a witness for Saver Sands. Was that your personal comment, or is that a view of the Saver Sands group that you were expressing?
I expressed it as a personal viewpoint. However, I believe I would be equally enthusiastically supported in that view by, if not all, the majority of my SOS colleagues.
You've probably heard me ask other witnesses this morning, how do you feel people in Dumfries perceive Whitesands as a space? Does it have special significance, or is its utility just a car park?
If I may draw my answer out a little on that, I have some unique experiences which give me some insight into the way in which the Whitesands is perceived. I know you said by Dumfries people, but by the larger, shall we call it, national or international community as a whole. I think the Whitesands is perceived as a very, very culturally and visually important part of Dumfries. All of the Dumfries residents, and in fact from districts outside of Dumfries. I live in Thornhill, some 15 to 20 miles to the north of Dumfries. All of the people that I would talk to locally view the Whitesands as a special place, certainly not just as a car park. There are a reasonable number of parks, grassy, leafy spaces around the River Nith area, which are used regularly. So there's adequate parkland for everyone to use, to picnic in, to do whatever they want to do around the river. There's not really adequate car parking nearby. So to take car parking away is going to detract from those current amenities as well, I would suspect. I know this is going to sound a little like a long story, but for nearly 30 years I lived internationally and worked in the tourism industry in Australia. And I had the good fortune to engage with tourists from Great Britain principally on a daily basis, very regular communication and discussion. And we talk about where we came from as part of a formal presentation that I used to do. A number of people from the UK would say that, oh yes, I know where you used to live, Dumfries, that's the lovely wee town that we drove through and decided to stop by the river. We had a bacon sandwich and wandered over the lovely bridge, and there's a great little waterfall there, and there's some lovely bird life in the middle of the river, isn't there? I said, yeah, that's my town, that's exactly where I come from. So it actually defines, in a way, the way in which visitors to Dumfries perceive Dumfries.
Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Greenwood. Mr. Dyson, do you have any final comments? Okay, thanks very much, Mr. Greenwood. I think we should take a short comfort break just now for about 15 minutes, so we'll meet back at 22, and then we'll hear from Mr. Dyson. Yep. Yep. Okay, could I ask Mr. Dyson to take a seat at the witness table, please? Yes, you may certainly bring your coffee. I wish you'd brought me one. Okay, Mr. Dyson, if you'd just like to settle yourself and then take your time and read out your recognition for us. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Just before my recognition, I'll just give my qualifications. I have a diploma in interior design from Dundee College of Art and a Master of Arts from the Royal College of Arts in London, specialising in environmental design. In terms of the background and context then, my name is John Dowson. I'm a retired environmental designer. I have lived and worked in Dumfries since 1980. I was a councillor for 11 years and leader of the council between 1995 to 1999. I chaired the Economic Development Committee for 5 years and was town centre manager for 2 years from 1999 to 2001. I served on the Standards Commission for Scotland between 2005 and 2011. Most of my design experience is in large-scale social housing developments. I have been asked to represent businesses and residents with a notifiable and general community interest in the proposed Whitesands Flood Protection Scheme. Our group is known as the Saver Sands Group, and they have submitted an objection as a group. I also submitted an objection as an individual and a local resident. Reference can be made to original objections throughout the inquiry and to council responses to these objections. The proposed scheme has been the subject of substantial local objection, which has not been withdrawn. When the council originally announced their plans a petition was organised by local resident Mr. David Slater, who is present. The petition asked people to sign if they wish to protect the river views and car parking. Over 6,000 people signed this petition, and a further 2,500 plus followed on social media through the Save Our Sands Facebook presence. Our objection has always been, and still is, against the Council proposal with regard to its effect on river views and car parking. We've called 4 local businesses as our key witnesses. They have a long history of working successfully on the Whitesands, despite the flooding, which they are skilled at dealing with. I consider their evidence as the most important statements that will be brought before the public inquiry. During the public inquiry, we intend to expose the failure of the Council to comply with their own policy of community engagement and to comply with the national standards of community engagement. This is important to our case, as we will demonstrate that with an effective community engagement process, then many objections could have been avoided and a community consensus could have been found for an alternative design solution. This would have avoided the need for a public inquiry. We will expose the fact that the Council, since the charrette of 2012, have only promoted one design option and refused to properly consider other alternatives which the community brought before them. There has been no effective option appraisal, and certainly no option appraisal that involved the community. We will point out that the charrette design process resulted in an over-engineered design outcome. The full-size mock-up that was built on the Whitesands was considered disastrous and inappropriate. The Council design team concluded that the design was unacceptable and needed significant rethinking. Members of the community concluded likewise. The charrette-led design was a clear failure. I consider the proposed scheme to be fatally flawed for a number of reasons. I'll try and give them. It does not have broad public support. In fact, very little support is evident for the Council design, despite the assertions made in various Council reports. Any real analysis of feedback that the Council claim as positive suggests that many people do support some kind of action, but very few people actually support the Council option. That option, it will fail to prevent flooding of the Whitesands from floods greater than 1 in 75 years. The Whitesands will still be classed as a floodplain by SEPA, and floods of more than 1 in 100 will come over the top and the water will be trapped in the town. There is no evidence for a 1 in 75 year standard and no record of that being agreed with the community. The 2012 charrette did agree to a 1 in 25 year solution being progressed, but we suspect that this decision was based on inaccurate information about the likely heights of the final barriers. Design options have not been fully appraised. The optimum design chosen, in my opinion, is not the best option for Dumfries. The report that finally went to Council comparing the Council option with the rising wall option did not compare like with like. The comparison was unfairly weighted in favour of the Council option. The Council option had taken a number of years to develop, yet the rising wall design was cobbled together in a matter of weeks and without community or acceptable and agreed specialist involvement. Community engagement has failed and has been designed to garner support for a pre-agreed Council option. We understand that any minister seeking to give deemed planning permission needs to be satisfied that a robust and fair community engagement process has been carried out. We submit that this is not the case with the Whitesands proposal. We also submit that the council scheme is in outline only and lacks important detail which should have been advertised. Council have stated that it would be a waste of time and money to provide this detail at this stage. We submit that any deemed planning permission can only be in principle and should be subject to a further submission of detailed designs, which should be advertised for a public objection in accordance with the Flood Risk Management 2009 Act. The proposals will adversely affect the historic character of the Whitesands and River Nith, and we'll deal with that at the visual and heritage sessions. The height and scope of the proposed permanent barrier and the materials used are inappropriate in a conservation area. The proposal removes historic river views of the River Nith and the Devergiller Bridge. We do not need a 365-day-a-year barrier for a 2-day flood. The proposals will result in a loss of parking at a key location in relation to Dumfries Town Centre, to the detriment of the vitality and viability of local businesses. Again, that will come up more at the Town Centre impact session. Ongoing operational and maintenance of the proposed scheme is likely to be costly, ineffective and potentially dangerous, and that will be discussed at the technical matters session. And the proposal requires a 2 to 3 year construction period with unnecessary disruption to local business and traffic. I mean, that's the main reasons where I think the design is flawed. But in general terms, I would like to make the following observations. The design shows little understanding and respect for the known background of the Whitesands and promotes a bund design option to be built on a historical beach site. The council have not consulted and listened to those that use and know the river, such as anglers, nor have they properly consulted property owners on the Whitesands who experience flooding. The council has not exhausted upriver storage works and land use potential. The decision not to do upstream work was premature and did not involve community engagement or consultation. The implication of not doing upstream work was never fully reported to councillors, and I refer to Jacob's 2007 report and Babte 1986, thereabouts. I'm not quite sure of the date of Babte, but it was about then. And I give reference in particular to the Housing Committee report of 2011. Babte and Jacobs both concluded that flooding on the Whitesands should be tackled by a joint strategy of upstream storage embankments and a barrier on the Whitesands. The first catastrophic design decision that the council made was to eliminate upstream works and concentrate solely on a barrier at the Whitesands. The implication of this was to ignore the recommendation of previous engineers, resulting in an increase in the required height of the barrier on the Whitesands. The costs for the scheme have risen beyond earlier expectations and do not offer value for money to the local and national taxpayer. The £25 million quoted in 2017 did not include an adequate estimate for the Scottish Water drainage works. Projecting Babte costs forwards 30 years indicates a current day cost of between 7 and 8 million. I estimate that the Whitesands scheme is moving rapidly towards a sum in excess of 40 million, which would require at least an 8 million contribution from the council. The reputation of Dumfries and Galloway Council has been severely damaged recently by the failure of large-scale capital projects emanating from the Environment and Infrastructure Department. For example, DG1, the new school complex at Northwest Dumfries, etc. There are others. Local taxpayers do not believe that Mr. Speedy's department can successfully oversee a capital project of this magnitude. The Council's reputation on operational and maintenance issues, particularly on the Whitesands, has been significantly damaged by the neglect of the most basic services. You only have to look at some of the photos that we have submitted of maintenance problems on the Whitesands to get an idea of just how badly the Council currently maintains the Whitesands and other parts of our town centre. The scheme is not a priority when compared with other schemes in Scotland, where large numbers of residential properties are vulnerable. Very few residential properties on the Whitesands are badly affected by flooding, as most of them are flats on upper floor levels. Council have been unable to secure a proper partnership with key agencies such as Scottish Water, SEPA, Historic and Environment Scotland and Scottish Natural Heritage, etc. We see that these agencies are only supporting the Council proposal in principle, partly because there is insufficient detail to give it full support. We are also aware that these agencies have only been meaningfully involved in one design option and have never fully commented on other options. I'm of the opinion that there are significant formal notification failures, particularly in Nunham, Kingham Quay and Dumfries Town Centre. It is my view that notifications should have been made to all properties within a potential 1 in 200 year flood zone, plus at least a 50-metre addition. Notification should also be made to commercial and retail properties in Dumfries High Street due to the changes in car parking. There seems to have been no notifications in relation to the proposed public realm improvements. The design proposed has been driven by financial opportunism rather than environmental or planning needs. There is an attempt to fund so-called public realm improvements by means of an 80% grant, which has been designed for eligible costs in relation to flood protection work. This will take scarce resources away from other schemes in Scotland. Dumfries and Galloway Council took a decision to confirm the scheme for reasons of political convenience rather than due design process. I will ask the reporters to keep in mind that the scheme was advertised in January 2017 for 28 days, plus an extended period due to an error. This was after a special meeting of the Council was convened on 29 December 2016 due to inadequacies in the way councillors had access to the objections. The Council agreed to advertise the scheme under the Flood Risk Management 2009 Act, but only after a split vote. It was by no means unanimous. It is my opinion that this process was rushed to complete the procedure prior to the election to be held in early May 2017. In May 2017, a new council administration was formed and a political agreement was made between the SNP and Labour to seek a public inquiry, as no consensus agreement could be found in support of the council proposal. And I refer there to a particular document, which is the actual agreement that was made between the SNP and Labour. It's document SOS 038 JJ, that's J for John, JJ. The interesting thing about that agreement is that it was not an agreement to support the council scheme, it was an agreement to seek a public inquiry. So the only way, in terms of seeking the public inquiry, the only way that this could be achieved was to confirm the scheme in June 2017, with many new councillors not even being aware of the details of the scheme, and they had not been involved in fully considering the objections as the Act requires. This resulted in a complaint from me to the Standards Commission for Scotland against Elaine Murray and Rob Davidson, in which it was alleged that the Labour and SNP groups had predetermined a quasi-judicial decision. It was only by the investigation officer ruling that this had not been a planning decision that this complaint was not upheld. Although the decision was to confirm the scheme without modification, both the Labour and SNP groups now confirm that they will accept the outcome of the public inquiry, including any modification or amendment, as long as that is the outcome of the public inquiry as recommended by the reporters. This is important, as if we are unable to persuade the reporters to recommend a rejection of the scheme, then we will propose modification amendments to the scheme, and we are pleased now that our councillors will ultimately support that outcome if it is included in the reporter's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Is there anything in addition that you want to raise that has arisen since the pre-recognitions were submitted that relates to the pre-recognition you've just given us?
Not particularly, because we've got all these other sessions to come, but I just wanted to clarify, in a sense, that last point, that my position and the position of the Whitesands group is that we want this scheme rejected. And you've heard from businesses saying that they would rather do nothing than have a scheme imposed that people didn't want or whatever. So I want to make it absolutely clear, because there was some inference this morning that perhaps the no do nothing option was being not pushed by us. That is our first position, is to do nothing, is to reject the scheme. And we said yesterday what we would do in such a scenario is that we would then sit down positively, hopefully, with the council and perhaps look at other options, but that would be for a future. If we cannot persuade you during the course of this inquiry to reject the scheme, we do have a backstop position where we would want to ask you to consider modification or amendment to the scheme. But I want to stress that's a kind of backstop position. Thank you.
Mr. Connell?
Thank you, ma'am. Let's just stick to that point at the moment, Mr. Dowson, because I'm aware you're, in a sense, speaking for a group, a coalition, if one likes to use the political term. I thought yesterday you had said that the idea of doing nothing about flooding wasn't sensible, and you accepted something should be done. Is that not correct?
I think I was trying to give appreciation to the work that has gone on in terms of all the local development plans, strategies, etc. I think I accept the principle, and I think many of our group would accept the principle, that some kind of work on the Whitesands to help mitigate the flooding, if that's the word, is still, in the long run, a good idea and maybe should be tackled at some time. In that sense, that is not a do-nothing option. That is accepting that in the long term, perhaps something should be done. But in terms of where we are today, in terms of this public inquiry and the scheme before us, we're quite clear that that is not the solution that we wish to see. And I would suggest that our first option of do nothing or rejection of the scheme is the best option and the right option, but particularly if that brings about a meaningful engagement with the council officers, which, as I have said, I don't think has been present to date.
Just so we're absolutely clear, a number of your colleagues on SOS have in effect said, you know, we can cope, we're used to it, we're resilient, it's not really a problem. Now, that would lead to the conclusion that you don't need to do flood defences because they've sorted it. Is that not your position?
Well, historically that's the position, and that's the current position they're in. And I think they would rather continue to do that than have a design option imposed upon them, as is being proposed here. And I think they've made that absolutely clear. So I would wish to support them in that. They've done it for years. Anyone who occupies a property, whether they're an owner of a property or renting a property in the Whitesands, well knows what they're walking into. They know their own responsibilities in terms of their property. I don't think they've ever really, I'm not aware of them ever really campaigning vigorously for a flood prevention scheme. The flood prevention scheme, as I understand it, has come about by the council seeking to address what they perceive as their duties under various pieces of legislation.
I'm not going to try to bandy words with you about legislation, Mr. Dowson, because that wouldn't be fair, but you were here at yesterday's session in which the statutory obligations on Scottish ministers, CEPA councils and so forth to reduce flood risk, produce plans to do so and so on were worked through. You were here during that session. So you would recognise that there is a legal obligation being, rightly or wrongly, put in place to reduce flood risk, and that there is a set method for moving through that process.
Yes, I do recognise that, and that's why I've always taken the view, and as a previous councillor, as a leader of the council, I've always taken the view that it's responsible for me, I'm speaking personally here rather than on behalf of the group, to recognise those duties, responsibilities that come from government, come from legislation. And that's why I say in the long run, I mean, I do support some of the comments Mr. Oliver Mundell made earlier. I'm not convinced that the Whitesands is the priority that's been given to it. I think there are more important schemes in Scotland in terms of particularly residential properties, and to some extent I think there's more important schemes even in Dumfries and Galloway. And here I would plead the case of the Nunham residents. I mean, I personally take a view that nothing should be done on the Whitesands until Nunham is addressed. So in terms of priorities of schemes, I would like to see a scheme being promoted for the Nunham residents in advance of a scheme for the Whitesands. And I would suggest that if that was done, the Nunham residents would be happy, and it would also remove the difficulty that the current scheme has in terms of potentially increasing water levels at Nunham. So, you know, in the long run, I accept, I was here yesterday, accept that legislation that is there. I accept it has to be addressed. I think the council are meeting their duties as best they can. But the bottom line is the scheme they've come forward with after, nearly 8 years is not acceptable. It's the optimum scheme as the council have seen it, but we don't consider it to be the best scheme for Dumfries.
Just while we're on that point, I think it's been made clear to you, is it not, by the reporters that this inquiry isn't here to go into the decision-making processes, who said what, who decided what and why, in relation to the political and other decisions within the council. That's been something that's made clear to you by the reporters, hasn't it?
Yes, it has, but I think it's important. My understanding is that the scheme is confirmed not by council officers, but by elected members. It is the elected members who confirmed the scheme and not the officers. And I think it's important that the reporters are aware of the background to that elected member's decision. And what I'm pointing out is that there was not a consensus politically amongst elected members even. And you'll have seen that even yesterday we had 2 elected councillors sitting with us in opposition to this scheme. So I think the background to that political decision is important. And the reason I referred to the political agreement that was signed between Labour and SNP was to point out that that agreement was not an agreement to support the council scheme. It was an agreement to seek a public inquiry, and the reason they sought a public inquiry is because even the Labour and SNP groups could not agree on the council scheme. The Labour Party locally have promoted this scheme and supported it, but the SNP group have never said to me that they would support it. All they have said to me is that they wanted a public inquiry, and they wanted a public inquiry that would look at the options and that would allow the people's voice to be heard. And I think that's one of the reasons we're here. We are not here because 43 councillors on Dumfries and Galloway Council voted for this scheme. We're here because of a political agreement to seek a public inquiry.
Well, thank you for that long answer, but the correct position, which you know perfectly well, Mr Dowson, don't you, is that the section you put in your recognition about these political discussions really shouldn't have been there, because you'd been told that wasn't a matter for the inquiry.
No one's ever told me that. When I write a precognition, it's my precognition, it's my view, and it's what I think is important to bring to the attention of the reporters and to the public. So I've not been instructed about what I can and cannot put in a precognition. Perhaps the reporters would help me out on this one, but, you know, I write from my experience.
I think perhaps what Mr Connell is clarifying is that we, at the pre-inquiry meeting, had said that we wouldn't discuss the electoral decisions and process as one of the topics for the inquiry. Could I just ask for a point of clarification? I don't have any wider comments for you, Mr Dowson, but you just mentioned that in your final 2 paragraphs of your recognition you were referring to document J. Is that 38J? I just wanted to check that I had the right reference. 38J is a committee report of the 10th of December 2014. That's not what you were meaning, was it?
Sorry, I should have highlighted the appropriate paragraph.
It is a document in the bundle which has at the section of the bundle where we're in double lettering, and it's JJ rather than J.
Right, okay.
It's headed a progressive partnership. That's the front page.
Okay. I don't have any further questions, so I'm quite happy.
I do.
Oh, right, sorry. Okay, that's fine. Sorry, Mr Connell. I sincerely apologise.
No. I had stopped on that particular point, but I do have a few more questions, ma'am. I'm not going to. let's leave the political process aside. For the moment, it is what it is. And we have councils, and councils make decisions. But I just wanted to ask you about this whole issue of petitions. Now, I'm not going to go and start digging out all the petitions and looking at each page, but would you agree that questions people have asked sometimes direct their answer? So if you say, would you like to do something about flooding in Fries, you might get an answer. If you say, would you like to preserve the car parking on the Whitesands, you might get a different answer. You would accept that, wouldn't you?
Well, absolutely. I think any question, any referendum, we've had a few recently, which have caused a lot of interest, and I think the manner and way in which you ask the question can certainly influence the outcome. And we certainly experienced that in many of the council's questions that were put to the public. For instance, if you ask a question like, do you agree that something should be done about flooding on the Whitesands, you're likely to get a 98% response to that of saying yes.
That's very helpful. If I can just move on to a few other points. I've already asked one of your colleagues about the emphasis on car parking, river views, and I've had that answer and it's confirmed in your recognition, so I needn't ask you about that. Can I just ask you about climate change, because at various places, we're going to come back to some of these topics, I know, Mr. Dowson, and I won't get into any detail on it, but as a matter of understanding, does your group accept that the kind of flooding we've been discussing, which sometimes may be not very bad and sometimes may be much worse, according to all the information, is going to get more frequent and potentially worse in the future due to climate change?
Well, I mean, in general terms, I can only speak personally here. We've not had a big debate about climate change and whether. But, I think we would accept from the evidence that's around that the likelihood of increased water levels in the future are there. And, I did raise the issue of climate change yesterday with SEPA, in which I understand SEPA's position, I may have got it wrong, but was that they were recommending, they have a 20% figure in their documents for climate change. Now, I don't know what that's 20% of. I assume that's 20% of the height of any alleged barriers or whatever. And my understanding at the moment is that the council scheme does not have a climate change factor. Now, I may be wrong in that, but I can't see it. I haven't seen any evidence of a climate change factor. So, yes, you may well be right. I think we may well be right that we can expect higher floods in future, yes.
And just for completeness, as well as higher floods, more frequent flooding incidents?
That could well happen. I can't totally predict that. But climate change happens over a long period of time. And as I said, and I hope I've said, that over that longer period of time, we need to look at whatever might be done on the Whitesands in much more detail. I don't think that the climate change factor is a justification for this particular scheme, particularly when the scheme that's been for us has not made any provision for climate change.
We'll come back to the... I think we agreed yesterday, ma'am, that we would be coming back to freeboard and climate change and so on in the technical session. So rather than pursue it at this point, Mr. Dowson, I'll move on. One of the general points you make in your recognition is you assert that the Council hasn't achieved an effective partnership with the various other bodies that troops that were all here yesterday in great numbers. I know your precondition was obviously written before the events of yesterday. Would you not agree that the indications are that there's been a huge amount of cooperation, discussion, and at many points agreement between the Council and all of these bodies?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I'm sorry, I think that is my point, that although there has been discussions with these agencies, my understanding is, and I did pose some 50-odd questions yesterday, 52 questions, only one or two, I think, of which I got answers to these 4 agencies. It's fairly clear to me that there is not what I call a partnership there. Partnership, I mean by that a genuine commitment to this particular scheme and to work it in partnership with the Council. For instance, talk to the Scottish Water officials and cost neutral. They're not going to put any money into it. That's their stance. We don't have the detail of the drainage and sewerage. They don't know what's proposed. We don't know what's proposed. Scottish Water, I think, are a long, long way away from making any real commitment into this scheme, because the scheme, nobody knows what it actually is. The detail just simply isn't there. SEPA, I think, have tried to meet their responsibilities, but are still standing at arm's length from it. And Historic Environment Scotland, I'm quite convinced that they've only been really consulted on one option. I think they're aware of that themselves. And they were quite clear yesterday, I think, in saying that they're not going to prejudge anything. And I certainly hope they don't. SNH, I think, I'm not going to say they're minor players, they're very important players, but I don't think that they have... I think the main body that I think where the partnership is failing is really with Scottish Water. And I think the reason for that is that there is not a proper scheme being designed. That I made the point yesterday that Scottish Water allege that there was no objections to the drainage proposals. And our view is there are objections to these drainage proposals, but the objections are largely based on the fact that there's no scheme to object to. The detail is simply not there. I don't know, and I ask constantly, well, how many pumping stations are there going to be? And where are they located? And what size are they? And where are they pumping to? And who's paying for them? The finances certainly aren't worked out, and that's why Scottish Water said they were cost neutral yesterday. And this, after all, 8 years of collaboration and coordination? It doesn't, well, to my mind, that's not successful.
Thank you, Mr. Dowson. Let's move on. We'll have some other sessions about drainage and sewerage arrangements and pumping stations, no doubt, to enlighten us in due course. But I'm a little concerned by your willingness in your statement, frankly, to make comments. You see on the second page, first bullet point, you say that if the 1 in 75-year defences are overtopped, and that will be a big one, if 2015 was 1 in 30, and just take that from me for the moment, 1 in 75 will be a very, very serious flood. Anyway, if that happens, you say the water will be trapped in the town. What's your basis for saying that?
My basis for saying that is I have not seen any detail whatsoever of how the water will get out of the town. There is no detail in the drawings that I've seen of how water will be removed. So until I see that detail on how, whether it's pumped out, whether it's let out, whatever, I have to assume it's trapped in there because I don't know how it's getting out, because we haven't been told about that.
So you make the statement because you have no information to the contrary, rather than because you have any positive information to support it. Is that fair?
I suppose that's fair, yes, I think I would accept that, but I would have expected in a scheme which is going to be overtopped, as SEPA seemed to suggest, that at some time in a 1 in 75-year duration, a flood of that size is likely to come and overtop. I would have expected, after 8 years of design and £2.1 million worth of fees, that technical issue would have been part of the design. People in Dumfries deserve to know how that's going to be dealt with, and we have no knowledge of it.
Just while we're on that paragraph, you talk about the charrette, and you say it's agreed a 1 in 25 solution being progressed, and we know that at that time that's what was done, and then it was altered to the 1 in 75 when it was discovered that that could be done without that much higher defences. And then you say, we suspect this decision was based on inaccurate information. What's your basis for that?
My basis for that is having talked to people about what who attended the charrette about what a 1 in 25, they did not fully understand what that meant. And we have specifically drawn attention to page 47 of the master plan document, which came along even 2 years later, where on page 47 there's a photograph of suggested levels as to what 1 in 25 would represent. And we believe that many people looked at that and felt maybe that was a reasonable level, because in that photograph it looks to be about 1.8, 1.9 metres. But in fact, it's 2.5 metres if you're going for a 1 in 20, so there's a significant difference. And you have to keep in mind that the 2.5 metres has been reduced since that diagram, particularly because of the recalibration that came along later. So without that recalibration, it would have been 2.7 metres. So, I mean, there's a very significant difference between what an actual 1 in 25 level is and what is indicated in that particular photograph. And we have submitted that. I can't, sitting here, I can't give you the document or photograph number, but we have ourselves gone back down and rephotographed at that location, having measured the levels, and we find a significant difference. So people looking at that, looking at the master plan in 2014, would have, in our opinion, my opinion, would have been given the wrong impression about what a 1 in 25-year level was.
And just, we're going to come back to community engagement, so I'm not going to ask you very much about that. But do you accept that when a solid example of the walkway or bund was built, it was felt it was too high, too obtrusive, and therefore the glass panel scheme was ultimately developed?
Yes, I do, but you see, that was the time to actually begin to recognise that, you know, trying to build a 3 metre high barrier on the Whitesands was maybe not the most sensible solution. I mean, if you wanted, I'm just going to be quite honest with you. Most people who passed that and commented to me effectively laughed at it and said, surely they're not going to build that on the Whitesands. And that's why I say that was the product of a charrette-led design. That's what the charrette-led design produced, was that effective, fairly monstrous design solution. Now, as I understand it, the design team themselves accepted that. And yes, you're right. They then tried to modify it or mitigate it realizing it was an adverse, there was a lot of adversity with it, they then sought to mitigate it. And the mitigation was to put glass panels in it. And to my mind, that's not an acceptable mitigation. It's still, as I said earlier, we do not accept that the bund is now 1.4 metres high. The barrier is 2.5 metres high, because that glass is still a barrier. And if it's not kept clean and maintained, it will be a real barrier. So the interesting thing, my understanding about the mock-up, which was built to a 1 in 75 year level, the current council scheme is to a 1 in 75 year level. The height was not reduced.
What was decided, was it not, that building a solid wall to a 1 in 75 year level was wholly unacceptable?
Yes, and very wise.
So therefore a different solution was proposed, both as to protection and as to height.
Well, yes and no in a sense. Yes, a different solution was proposed, but this was another example of the council just simply not listening. At that time, people were saying quite strongly that the bund was not a solution that was wanted. And that is still the position. People were still saying, why are we building a 365-day-a-year barrier for a 2-day flood? We understand that the council design team made efforts to mitigate the whole thing, but they were dealing with a failure to start with. That was the time for them to have stopped, come back to the community, talk to us about alternative solutions, but they did not do that. And that, in my mind, was an error on their part.
So, just so we don't get into undue argy-bargy over this, you accept that as a result of the various exchanges that took place, a higher barrier was rejected, a lower barrier was adopted, and then glass panels were adopted for the top 1.1 metres of that barrier, giving you a 1 in 25 year protection by that system.
No, I don't accept that, and I don't think you've been listening to the point I've made. What I accept is that there's still a 2.5 metre high barrier there. The fact that the top metre of it or so is in glass is, in my mind, is still part of a barrier. It's still a visual barrier. And we have not seen the details of the glass. We've not seen the details of any of the steel that's around it, of the frame. There's nothing in these drawings that gives me confidence that that glass barrier, I mean, what I'm getting from you is that you're trying to suggest that it doesn't exist visually. We say it does. And therefore, and I'll say it again, my opinion is that the permanent barrier that has been built or proposed by the council is 2.5 metres high, not 1.4 metres high.
Okay, well, I think we'll defer that to one of the detailed sessions if you don't accept that 1 metres of glass is different from 1.1 metres of embankment.
I didn't say that.
I've not much more to ask, Ma'am. Again, it's been a constant theme of the Save Our Sands campaign, and I'll use that in a broad sense, to complain about the Council's performance on other projects. You would agree that these issues are not matters for this inquiry, I assume?
I think the Council's reputation and ability to handle large-scale capital projects and the maintenance of them is very relevant to this inquiry.
I'm happy to leave that point to submissions. Sorry, ma'am, I'm being directed to the fact that there is material in the order about floodwater release mechanisms, but it's easier to deal with that once we have technical sessions in play. I've nothing further to add.
Thank you. I had intended to wind things up by really just accepting that a number of the matters that Mr Dowson has raised in recognition will, I think, be addressed in quite some detail in future sessions, and that we'll have an opportunity to explore them in much more detail then. So if no one has any other points to make, I would close this first session, and we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9:30 in the Johnston room of the Holiday Inn. It is a much smaller room. We will have to confine our space quite significantly in comparison with today, but we will rearrange the space on a similar basis but smaller scale. So thank you everyone for your time and your participation today. It's much appreciated.